This series is made possible by the generous donation of Stifel Financial and viewers like you. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Kate Wilkin, and I work for the University of California Cooperative Extension as the Forest and Fire Advisor in Butte, Nevada, and Yuba counties. And that sounds kind of big and complex, but let me try to break it down for you. And so, a University of California faculty at a university, their job is to complete research and to teach students. As University of California Cooperative Extension, my job is to do research, but also to extend that research to the public and people like you sitting at home tonight. So as a UC Cooperative Extension Forest and Fire Advisor, my goal is to extend the best available research to the people who are helping people prepare here in our region. And so I often work with the agencies and partners throughout town to help make sure that they're aware of the latest research that people have published and that they can incorporate that into their planning and preparedness. When I think about the fire problem in California, I know that there are so many solutions and that there are so many people who need to be part of those solutions. And I know a lot of organizations have large volunteer corps, and I see my role as a University of California Cooperative Extension Advisor to help train those volunteers so that they can extend that information to the public. I know that when we think about fire in California, it can be really overwhelming. You can think, what can I do? I'm just one person. But what I can say is you can start at your own home, where you live with your family. You can have an evacuation plan so that if there is a fire, you know how to get out and you know how to protect your family. The next step would be to preparing your home and the lands around it, so making sure that your home is fire resistant. Then working on the defensible space surrounding that. And once you kind of have your own personal things tackled, you can really start to engage in the broader community, and you can think about, how can I work with my neighborhood so all of these people can achieve the same goals that I have, and together we'll be stronger. In California, we've been hearing about defensible space for quite a long time because we have a public resource code about it, California 4291. And when I think about 4291, I know that it was written many years ago, and since then we've had many unfortunate fires, and we've increased our knowledge about what actually improves home survival. And there's this new zone around a home, within 5 feet of a home actually, where University of California, the National Fire Protection Association, Firewise USA, and the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety are all recommending to have no combustible materials within 5 feet of a home, or low combustibility. And I know people will say, but Kate, I love my plants. And I have to tell them, I love plants too. I was a botanist. But I have to think about where I can put the plants that I love so that my home is safe and so that they're also safe. And so the message we're trying to tell people now is that from 0 to 5 feet of a house, you have no combustible objects. Or maybe low combustibility if you're really good at maintenance. I'm not, but maybe you are. So you could have a well-irrigated lawn that you mow regularly, or maybe a few annual plants with a rock mulch. And then out from there, from 5 feet to 30 feet, it's the lean, clean, and green zone. And in that area, you'll have beautiful plants, but they're gonna be spaced really wide apart so that there's no continuous fuel leading towards your home. And you'll have beautiful hardscaping. I've seen flagstones and decomposed granite and tile work that you can use to kind of break up all of those fuels that are near your home. And then from 30 feet to 100 feet out, you'll have reduced fuel. So around my home, that means we have large ponderosa pine trees and cedar trees. But we've reduced the understory cover some, and we've really opened up the forest canopy in that area. So California Public Resource Code 4291, it has 2 zones, 0 to 30 feet, which is lean, clean, and green, and the 30 to 100 feet, which is reduced fuel. And that was based on research that was done in the early 2000s, and it was passed in 2010. And so I think that we have a lot more knowledge since, unfortunately, because of all the wildfires we've suffered here in California, and we know that we need to go further than that to really protect a home. And the reason that we need to go further than California Public Resource Code 4291 is that we know many homes burn because of embers getting into attics, but also because of embers that land at the base of a house. And your mulch, and your woody plants that are not well maintained, and your lawn that wasn't mowed that week. And when an ember lands really close to your house, maybe within 0 to 5 feet, and you get a small fire, that small fire can grow and it can catch your house on fire. And so the latest research and the latest recommendations at the national level and also for the University of California is to really focus on this new 0 to 5 foot no combustible to low combustible zone. So sometimes people think with defensible space, more is better. But what I can say is that more isn't always better. If I eat too much chocolate cake, I'm probably going to feel ill. And so when I think about defensible space and your home, I know that we really need to have the most intensity right around the home itself. You want your home to be fire resistant. You want to have low to no combustibility within 5 feet. From 5 to 30 feet, have a lean, clean, and green zone. And then from 30 to 100 feet, you have reduced fuels. And nowhere in there, except within 5 feet of a house, am I talking about bare mineral soil or rocks. Beyond that, you can enjoy the greenery of nature and flowers and trees, but you just want to be very careful about their spacing. I've heard some people say, I'm really afraid of fire. I'm going to have 500 feet of bare mineral soil. And I get worried because I think that's a lot of work. But I also know that doesn't necessarily protect them from fire. It protects them from one aspect of a fire, it protects them from a flame front moving past their house, but it doesn't protect them from the embers. It could still catch that house on fire. I also know that when we start to have 500 or more feet of defensible space, that sometimes that actually might negatively impact our natural resources. We need to be careful about how we manage our defensible space. Sometimes we live in these beautiful mixed conifer forests like around here in Nevada City. And reducing the fuels in those forests actually could be a type of restoration that could be good for them. But in other times, if you live maybe in a chaparral area, reducing those fuels for more than 100 feet could actually be detrimental to that plant community. And so we just need to be really mindful of how we use defensible space and knowing that we only really need about 100 feet for our home, unless you live on a very steep slope or if there's very dense vegetation, you might want to extend it to 200 feet. Mulch is a really interesting topic. As a gardener, my mom taught me to know that mulch was really important for a plant's water relationships, to make sure that the plant could have water on a really hot day. But as a fire scientist, I know that mulch can be troublesome near the home because many types of mulch, the wood chips, the pine straw, the gorilla hair, the recycled plastic shredded mulch, all of those things burn. And they burn hot. And there's some really great videos that you can Google. You can look at University of Nevada, Reno, burned mulch, Google that, and you'll actually see all the different videos on YouTube of how mulch burns. And so rather than using a combustible mulch, near your house, I would recommend either having bare mineral dirt until you can make a decision about what type of inorganic or rock mulch you want, and then you can use some sort of rock mulch with the weed barrier to reduce the maintenance. I have a view from my house, and I know many of us live in this region because we love the vistas of the mountains and of the forests. But we also need to know that when we live on a ridgetop, that may not, it's an area that's really hard to defend or to create a fire-resistant home because of the heat coming up that hillside. But if you set back your home 100, 200 feet from the steep slope, your home will actually be more likely to survive. So if you're in the construction phase, consider different site placement if you can. So you have a fire racing up a hill, and the reason that it races up a hill is that the flames actually lean over and they preheat the vegetation in front. So it's pre-warming everything going up that hill. And so fires race uphill very quickly because of the way they pre-warm the fuels. And so if your house is at the top of the ridge, it's going to be getting one hell of a punch from that fire because that fire will be at its full pace, the fastest it's going to be able to remove. because of all of that preheating. But if you are set back from the ridge line 100 feet or more, then oftentimes that energy is reduced because the flames are no longer preheating the fuel and the intensity is much lower. Hot air rises and the flames are heating the fuel that's in front of them. So it's a very quick chain reaction. You know, I always have a hard time with this question because I love plants quite a lot, but I also know that all plants burn. And so having a fire-wise plant list can be kind of a misnomer. It doesn't really quite exist. I've also heard people say, oh, well, California's native plants, those are fire-wise. Well, California has always had frequent fire, and they're adapted to frequent fire, so they're not necessarily less flammable. Some of them actually might be more flammable. I think that one thing I can agree upon is that there's like a do not plant list. So that might be things like juniper, things that can burn really hot near a house. That seems like a bad idea. Or maybe having manzanita right against the house, another bad idea. And there's a few more of those types of plants that I would say those can sit on the do not plant list. But as for what you can plant, I would say it's less about the particular plant and more about how they're laid out in your yard and how much space is around them and how you maintain them. So there are a few other plants that are beautiful native plants that I have where I live. So ponderosa pine and California black oak, both beautiful trees, wonderful habitat. I love seeing the woodpeckers and the warblers sitting in them and the squirrels going after the nuts. It's a lot of fun. But I understand that both of these trees have leaves and needles that are highly flammable. And they both drop leaves or needles in the fall. A pine tree, will keep most of its needles, but in the fall there will be some needle drop. And unfortunately, that needle drop happens right during our wind fire season. So it happens in October, November. And so I would recommend that people be very aware of having those trees near their house, because these trees, when they drop their leaves and their needles, will actually catch embers and start small fires around your house. And so you need to be honest with yourself about how much maintaining and how much leaf and needle clearing that you can do every week to keep those fuels away from your house. I know for myself, I moved here a week before the October 2017 wind fires. The Lobo, the McCourtney, the Cascade. And I had been up on my roof the day before the windstorm happened, blowing all of the leaves off of our roof and off of our deck. The next day, after those fires, I went back up and we blew the roof again and gathered up all the black oak leaves and all the pine needles from the deck. And ultimately, I had 5 huge leaf and lawn bags full of needles and leaves. From one day to the next, we did have that large wind event, right? But it was just the time of year when those trees are dropping their needles and leaves. And that's a lot to maintain. So I think people just need to be really honest with themselves about how much maintenance they can do. When I think about maintaining around your house to get rid of those fine fuels, those leaves and needles, it's something you do before fire season starts. It's something you do every week. And sometimes it's something you have to do every day of every week. Because of the way the weather is happening, if you have strong winds, and also the time of year when things are dropping. Right, so when I think about what makes a fire-resistant home, they often have, I think about maybe the top 5 things that you can do. You can have a roof that's resistant to fire, a deck that's resistant to fire, you can have defensible space, and you can work on your siding and your windows. But so when I think about a roof, you want to make sure that your roof is resistant to fire, and that's having a Class A roof. And that could be a shingle roof, it can be a metal roof, or a tile roof. And a lot of times I hear people say, I have a metal roof, I'm okay from fire. And we have to be really careful with those assumptions, because when I think about a fire-resistant home, it's always about the design, the materials, and the maintenance. And so metal and tile roofs, they often have these gaps on the edges. These little gaps that you need to plug up with some sort of filler, which I'm certain the building department can tell you what to use, and I can't. But what I can say is that little critters love to make nests there, whether they're a wasp or a bird or a small mammal like a mouse. It's the perfect size for a nest, which is unfortunate because then you have all these grasses and needles and leaves right on your wooden roof deck underneath the concrete or underneath the concrete or the tile or the metal, and that actually is what often catches those types of roofs on fire. One of the other things every home needs is to make sure that they have attic and basement vents that can reduce the number of embers that come into that house. And that is currently regulated in the California Building Code Chapter 7A. But if you have an older home like myself, then it didn't apply when it was built, because that's a newer building code. And so I've gone back into my house. When we first moved in, we couldn't afford fancy new vents. And so we went to the hardware store and bought 1/8 inch screen, and we stapled that over all of our vents in our attic and our basement. Once we kind of settled, through the moving into a new place, we were able to afford new vents. And so we went to the California Building Code website, and we looked to see, what were the main companies they recommended and the style of vents. We decided on a vent that had an exterior baffling, and then a 1/8 inch screen that had intumescent paint. So I said a lot of things, so let me try to break that down just a little bit. So the reason we have attic vents is because they help your attic air circulate so that your home doesn't rot from the inside out. But in a fire, they actually serve two main purposes, these vents. All vents in your house can allow embers to go into your house. And then if your home is close enough to another structure or maybe some plants that catch fire, then those vents can also be a way that you can have direct flame going into your house. And so when I thought about what type of vent I really wanted on my house, I wanted a vent that reduced the amount of embers that could go in. That's why we have the exterior baffling, because as the air moves up and down to get through the vent, those metal slats actually help snuff out those embers. And then we have the 1/8 inch screen, because again, that helps reduce the amount of embers that are going into the attic. And then that screen has an intumescent paint. And what intumescent paint is, it has a chemical composition that swells when it's exposed to heat. So if something nearby is on fire, then that intumescent paint will swell shut and not allow anything else into the attic or crawl space. And I think, for most people, we're going to need vents that can do all of those things, not one or the other. The other thing that I would recommend is to have some plywood cutouts that you can put over the exterior of your vents before you evacuate if you have time. I know a lot of our evacuations in California are unfortunately becoming much shorter and shorter time frames before we have to leave. And so you have to be ready to leave without any of that. But if you have the time, it could be nice to put on. One question I'm often asked is, Kate, I really want vents, but I'm not sure if I can afford them, especially if you're on a fixed income. But we have a resource, the USDA Rural Development Loan Service actually will give loans out for home improvements and home renovations that include making your home resistant to fire. And so that can be one way. So these types of renovations like vents, closing in your soffits, updating your deck, can be affordable for people who are here and living on a fixed income. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety has a wildfire checklist. And you can Google that, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety Wildfire Checklist. And it can go through, and it tells you every vent to look at, every window, every place where you should have put caulking in, or you need to put caulking in. And it can help walk you through that list of items to do. And it's an extensive list. There are these top 5 areas that you really need to work on as a resident of a fire zone. At the same time, there's areas that are beyond that we all should be working on still. Because fire is kind of like water. It's probably going to find a way in. So we need to be very careful and have well-maintained homes. So if I was at home on a Saturday morning with my family and I started to see wildfire embers come toward us, the first thing I would do, I wouldn't be thinking about where's my garden hose, where's my fire extinguisher. I'd be thinking about where's the fire coming from and how can we evacuate quickly. Because I know that an early evacuation is the safest for my family, for my husband and my little baby. I know that the longer you wait to evacuate, the more deadly those evacuations become. And to me, that's the most important factor for my family. Yeah, so getting trapped by a fire is a terribly scary thing, and I can say that even being someone who has fought fires. And so when I think about if I'm trapped by a fire, what do I want to do to protect myself and my family? As a fire scientist, I know that one of the most deadly things about a fire is actually the radiant heat that comes off of it. It has superheated air. And if I were to breathe that superheated air, or if my baby was going to breathe that superheated air, it would burn our lungs, and that would be an injury that we couldn't come back from. And so I would really want to be careful about having a place like a house, something, a structure to help protect us if we can't escape, so that the radiant heat can be absorbed by the exterior of that. Another way that you can try to protect your lungs from radiant heat if you can't evacuate, that you're trapped, you're pinned in, is you can think about areas nearby where there's no fuels, maybe an irrigated pasture, maybe a large concrete parking lot, areas where you might find some safety. And those areas aren't really a guarantee of safety because, again, it's about the superheated air, and those areas have to be quite large to protect your lungs. So I often hear people say, oh, should I wet a rag and put it over my face to protect it from the superheated air? And in fact, that can make it worse, because when the superheated air hits that moisture, it's going to vaporize, and then you're going to have hot steam. So maybe a dry rag, that could be helpful, but probably not water. Oftentimes we're asked, when can I get home? I just want to get home. But we all need to realize that a fire doesn't go out the day after it goes through an area. Things continue to burn for many days, if not weeks, until there's a major rain event. And so the area is actually very unsafe to be in because of that. We also, after a wildfire, especially through an urban area or a suburban area, we need to be worried about downed power lines and also about the things that it burned besides trees, all the houses that it burned, all of the garages that had gasoline and paint in them. And so there are lots of things in an area that's experienced a wildfire that are very dangerous for people. And so what I would tell to people who are experiencing this, I know you want to be home really badly, but we just need to be patient. We need to be patient so that it's safe when you take your family back.